In the corridors of power, history has often been written by those who seized the state. Some ruled with unwavering authority, their influence spanning decades. They controlled armies, courts, and the very instruments of governance. Yet, the weight of power is a delicate balance. The same hands that built empires, shaped nations, and commanded loyalty, were often the first to feel its bitter reversal. This is the story of those who controlled the state, until they were overthrown. To understand those who fell from power, one must first understand how they rose. In every corner of the globe, the ascension of a ruler or political elite is rarely accidental. It is forged through strategy, alliances, and often, ruthless calculation. They understood the pulse of the people, the fragility of their rivals, and the machinery of the state. They leveraged institutions, manipulated laws, and navigated the labyrinth of political factions. Some wielded charisma as a weapon, others, sheer force. Behind closed doors, decisions were made that would shape the lives of millions. And yet, even at the height of their power, shadows lurked, the seeds of dissent, the whispers of betrayal. History is replete with examples: the statesman who consolidated power over decades, only to be undone by a single miscalculation; the general who commanded armies, yet failed to command loyalty; the political architect whose genius was eclipsed by envy and intrigue. Control over the state is more than titles or ceremonies. It is the orchestration of systems, both visible and unseen. Bureaucracies, intelligence networks, and military forces became instruments in the hands of those who understood the architecture of authority. They mastered the delicate balance between fear and favor, rewarding loyalty while punishing dissent. Propaganda and narrative became as potent as armies, shaping the perception of the public. Every decree, every policy, was a thread in a web designed to sustain dominion. But power is never static. Even the most formidable structures are susceptible to fractures: a disloyal aide, a misread faction, a populace fatigued by excesses. And when the first crack appears, it widens rapidly, often unnoticed until the moment of collapse. No reign, however absolute, exists in isolation. Every ruler faces challenges: individuals, factions, or entire movements seeking to redraw the map of power. Opposition can be overt, in the form of rebellion and insurrection, or subtle, simmering quietly within the corridors of administration. History demonstrates that those who once seemed invincible often underestimated the capacity of resistance. The overthrown rulers, time and again, ignored the subtle erosion of loyalty. Allies turned into adversaries, confidants became conspirators, and the machinery of state, once a source of strength, became the instrument of their undoing. Those who command the state often believe their power eternal. Generals who once marched unopposed, ministers who shaped policy with a stroke of the pen, and monarchs whose names were etched in stone, all share a common arrogance. The illusion of invincibility blinds even the most astute, and history is quick to punish hubris. They surround themselves with loyalists, often choosing affirmation over counsel. Advisors who dare question are silenced or dismissed. Policies that once strengthened the state become mechanisms of control, gradually alienating allies and emboldening rivals. Power, once secure, begins to teeter on a knife's edge. Every empire, every administration, every political dynasty harbors this fragile core, a tension between outward strength and internal fragility. And within that tension, the seeds of overthrow are quietly sown. The most decisive blow rarely comes from the battlefield. It comes from within. History is filled with tales of trusted confidants, generals, and ministers who turned their loyalty into a dagger aimed at the heart of authority. Betrayal is both art and strategy. The disloyal exploit overconfidence, weaknesses, and moments of distraction. They manipulate perception, forge alliances with rivals, and quietly prepare the machinery that will dismantle a ruler's power. Often, the first act of treachery is invisible to the one who commands, unnoticed until the consequences are irrevocable. From ancient courts to modern states, betrayal has been the instrument that transforms dominance into downfall. What once seemed unassailable can collapse in a matter of hours when trust is violated, loyalty is bought, or ambition overtakes duty. Power exists not only in the hands of rulers but in the perception of the people they govern. Public opinion, shaped over years, can turn a dynasty's greatest strength into its most glaring vulnerability. Popular unrest, economic hardship, and social tension are often the catalysts that expose the cracks in a state's control. Leaders who ignore the growing discontent often find themselves isolated. Their decrees fail to command respect. Their armies, once loyal, hesitate. The very institutions designed to uphold authority are tested, stretched, and eventually break under pressure. Revolutions and coups are rarely spontaneous. They are the culmination of years of neglect, mismanagement, and the erosion of trust. And when the state itself turns against its master, the final chapter of power is written with relentless speed. The fall of power is cinematic in its inevitability. Months of plotting, years of tension, decades of authority, all condense into moments of decisive action. A palace is stormed, a capital falls silent, a decree is rescinded, or a leader is forced into exile. What seemed eternal is extinguished, leaving behind only the echoes of ambition and failure. In the wake of overthrow, the state often appears chaotic, yet the machinery of governance endures. Power changes hands, narratives are rewritten, and history judges those who fell with a mixture of fascination and caution. Each story carries lessons of hubris, strategy, loyalty, and betrayal, echoing through the ages. In the earliest civilizations, the line between god and ruler was often blurred. Pharaohs of Egypt, emperors of Mesopotamia, and kings of the Indus Valley wielded authority absolute in its scope. Yet, even these seemingly immortal rulers were not immune to the tides of history. The pharaoh Akhenaten sought to redefine the spiritual and political landscape, elevating the worship of one god above all others. In doing so, he alienated priests, nobles, and military leaders alike. Within decades, his reforms were reversed, temples restored, and his legacy condemned to obscurity. Power, no matter how centralized, is fragile when it disrupts the intricate balance of loyalty and tradition. Similarly, in Mesopotamia, kings rose and fell not only through war but through the intricate dance of palace intrigue. The Assyrian rulers, famed for their military prowess, faced constant conspiracies from within their own court. A single betrayal, a guard, a minister, or a distant relative, could tip the balance, leaving the empire vulnerable to external enemies and internal collapse. Even the greatest empires, which dominated vast regions for centuries, ultimately succumbed to the interplay of ambition, loyalty, and public sentiment. Power, no matter how absolute, always demands vigilance. The medieval era transformed political power into an elaborate theater of intrigue. Monarchs ruled with divine authority, but their courts were rife with rivalries. Nobles, advisors, and heirs navigated a landscape of shifting alliances where trust was rare and betrayal frequent. In England, the Wars of the Roses exemplified the deadly consequences of contested succession. The houses of Lancaster and York engaged in decades of battles, assassinations, and betrayals. Kings who sat securely one day could be unseated or executed the next. Even the most loyal allies often held ambitions that threatened the throne from within. Meanwhile, in Japan, the shogunates relied on a delicate balance of power between the central military authority and regional daimyos. A shogun who miscalculated loyalty or allowed resentment to fester would find his power challenged, often violently, as rival clans seized opportunities to redefine control. The 18th and 19th centuries brought a new form of state power, one shaped by constitutions, parliaments, and burgeoning public consciousness. Yet the rules of survival remained unchanged. Power could be seized, maintained, or lost through careful strategy and, often, ruthless force. The French Revolution demonstrated the ultimate vulnerability of absolute authority. Louis XVI, once the embodiment of monarchy, became the prisoner of his own capital. Popular unrest, economic collapse, and the fervor of revolutionary ideals converged to dismantle centuries of inherited power. Execution followed, a stark reminder that authority detached from legitimacy is doomed. Across the globe, similar patterns emerged. Military coups in Latin America, Asia, and Africa illustrated that even modern states, equipped with armies and bureaucracies, could not survive internal dissent and eroding legitimacy. Leaders were deposed not only by external enemies but by those who once served as their most trusted allies. Whether in ancient empires, medieval courts, or modern nations, the overthrow of power follows a recognizable pattern: consolidation, overreach, betrayal, public discontent, and finally, collapse. The instruments of authority, armies, bureaucracies, propaganda, can preserve dominion, but they cannot shield a ruler from strategic missteps or the erosion of trust. History repeatedly illustrates a simple truth: control over the state is never permanent. The more absolute the rule, the sharper the fall. And yet, in every downfall, there lies a lesson about ambition, loyalty, governance, and the enduring power of those who rise to seize what others lose. The 20th century witnessed the most rapid and dramatic shifts in political power in human history. Advances in communication, transportation, and military technology accelerated both the rise and fall of leaders. Empires crumbled, dictatorships emerged, and democracies were tested in ways previously unimaginable. Consider the fall of Tsar Nicholas II in Russia. The once unquestioned authority of the Romanovs disintegrated under the pressures of war, economic collapse, and revolutionary fervor. Advisors urged reform, yet Nicholas clung to tradition and divine right. Within months, centuries of monarchy were swept away, replaced by a regime whose ideology would dominate the 20th century. In Germany, the collapse of the Weimar Republic revealed how fragile political structures can be when faced with economic despair and rising extremism. Leaders who underestimated public discontent and the allure of authoritarianism inadvertently paved the way for dictatorship, only for that power to ultimately implode under war, defeat, and internal betrayal. Across the world, military coups and revolutions became instruments of change. In Latin America, Asia, and Africa, leaders who once commanded loyalty were deposed, exiled, or executed. Even those who mastered bureaucracy and propaganda were not immune. Loyalty is not static, and history is unforgiving to misjudgments of human ambition. Power is intoxicating. It distorts perception, erodes empathy, and fosters the belief in personal invincibility. Leaders who overreach often do so not because of incompetence, but because of a psychological certainty that they are untouchable. Yet history demonstrates that no fortress, army, or ideology can indefinitely shield a ruler from the consequences of hubris. Isolation is a key factor. Surrounded by sycophants, rulers begin to misinterpret loyalty for reality. Advisors who once guided prudence become enablers of excess. Decisions that appear brilliant in isolation often trigger cascading failures. And when trust erodes, in allies, in institutions, or in the public, the machinery of control becomes the machinery of undoing. Ambition, paranoia, and the constant tension between fear and loyalty define the psychology of power. Those who fall are often victims not only of external forces but of internal miscalculations, human flaws amplified by absolute authority. In the 21st century, the mechanisms of power have evolved, yet the fundamental rules remain unchanged. Social media, instantaneous communication, and globalized scrutiny have compressed the timeline of authority. Leaders can rise and fall within months, sometimes days, under the watchful eyes of billions. Consider the Arab Spring. Leaders who seemed untouchable were swept from office in weeks as citizens mobilized, defying centuries of entrenched authority. Digital platforms amplified public sentiment, accelerated organization, and documented abuses, making secrecy nearly impossible and weakening the structures that once sustained absolute power. Even in established democracies, scandal, public outrage, and loss of political trust can rapidly erode influence. The lesson endures: legitimacy is as vital as authority. Power without consent, tacit, explicit, or institutional, is always temporary. From ancient pharaohs to modern presidents, from emperors to generals, history presents a recurring truth: control over the state is both fragile and fleeting. The instruments of power, armies, bureaucracies, propaganda, can sustain authority, but they cannot defend against ambition, betrayal, or the erosion of legitimacy. The fall of a ruler is never a single event. It is the culmination of decisions, alliances, betrayals, and public perception. Each story, each downfall, is a testament to the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and overreach, ambition and wisdom. Those who controlled the state, until they were overthrown, offer lessons that transcend time and geography. History reminds us that power is not a guarantee, it is a responsibility. Loyalty is not permanent, it is conditional, and authority, however absolute, is always subject to the forces of human ambition, societal expectation, and the inexorable flow of time. As the pages of history continue to turn, one truth remains constant: to rule is to balance, to wield power is to navigate peril, and to fall is as inevitable as the rise itself. The stories of those who once controlled the state serve as both warning and reflection, monuments not in stone, but in the consequences of human ambition. History is never silent. It speaks in the rise and fall of those who dared to grasp the levers of power. And for those who listen, it offers wisdom, caution, and, above all, the enduring reminder that no dominion is eternal. Power is fragile not only because of enemies outside the state, but because of the complexities within. Loyalty, carefully cultivated, can uphold a ruler for decades, yet, it is easily undermined by fear, suspicion, or the allure of opportunity. In ancient courts, the loyalty of generals often determined the survival of kings. A single defection could topple an empire. The Roman Empire, sprawling and complex, relied on legions whose allegiance was often more to their commanders than to the emperor himself. When loyalty shifted, so too did the fate of rulers, sometimes overnight. Fear, too, can sustain authority. The ruler who inspires awe and dread simultaneously ensures obedience, but over time, fear becomes brittle. Allies may obey outwardly, yet plan quietly, calculating the exact moment to strike. History demonstrates that fear without respect is a temporary shield, one that collapses under pressure. Control of the state is rarely divorced from the economy. Wealth, resources, and the perception of prosperity underpin authority. When these foundations crumble, the very institutions designed to support power are destabilized. The fall of the Soviet Union illustrates this principle with stark clarity. A superpower, armed with armies and ideology, was undone not by external conquest but by economic stagnation, bureaucratic inefficiency, and systemic corruption. When the populace loses confidence in the material and social systems, loyalty dissolves, leaving even the most formidable regimes vulnerable. Across centuries, from imperial dynasties to modern states, financial mismanagement has often been the silent architect of downfall. Armies may remain loyal, advisors may remain faithful, but when survival becomes uncertain for the people, no authority can endure indefinitely. Ideology has long been a weapon and a shield. Rulers who align themselves with a vision of society can inspire unwavering loyalty, yet ideology can also constrain and blind. In the 20th century, totalitarian states relied on ideology to justify control over millions. The leaders of these regimes wielded doctrine like a sword, eliminating dissent and shaping thought. Yet, when reality diverged from promises, ideology became brittle. When people saw hypocrisy or failure, the structures of obedience quickly disintegrated, leaving rulers exposed to revolt or betrayal. History demonstrates that ideology, no matter how compelling, cannot fully substitute for legitimacy or trust. Leaders who ignore this risk the most dramatic of downfalls, the sudden, chaotic collapse of authority they believed unassailable. Power is a game not only of strategy and psychology but of timing and circumstance. Chance, the unpredictable movements of allies, enemies, and events, has toppled rulers as surely as betrayal or rebellion. Alexander the Great, commanding one of history's greatest empires, died young. His empire fractured under the ambitions of generals who had once been loyal. Napoleon, a master strategist, was undone not solely by military defeat but by the complex interplay of politics, climate, and circumstance. Even in the modern era, unexpected events, economic crashes, health crises, or scandals, can accelerate the downfall of regimes that seemed secure. History reminds us that no strategy is infallible and no authority is immune to the unpredictable tides of fate. The fall of a ruler does not erase their impact. Policies, wars, architecture, and institutions often outlive those who controlled them. The legacies of overthrown leaders shape the societies that follow, offering lessons, warnings, and inspiration. Even those condemned by history leave traces: roads built, laws enacted, cultural transformations initiated. Their mistakes, their ambition, and their downfall continue to teach. Every overthrown leader becomes a cautionary tale, a mirror in which future rulers glimpse the delicate balance of power. History does not forget. It preserves the narrative of rise and fall, reminding us that the corridors of power are both awe-inspiring and perilous, and that every human endeavor in governance is shadowed by the possibility of collapse. Rome, the eternal city, was a crucible of ambition. Julius Caesar, a brilliant general and master politician, rose to unprecedented heights. With victories in Gaul, he commanded armies, influence, and adoration. Yet, absolute power in the heart of a republic is always precarious. Caesar's reforms and centralization of authority alarmed the Senate. Brutus, Cassius, and other senators, once allies, plotted in shadowed chambers. Fear of tyranny, combined with envy and personal ambition, turned loyalty into betrayal. On the Ides of March, the culmination of decades of ambition met the inevitability of political reality. Caesar fell not because of military defeat, but because the very individuals he trusted most deemed his power intolerable. Rome would never forget that moment, a lesson that absolute authority, even in a republic, carries the seeds of betrayal. The French monarchy, entrenched in centuries of tradition, faced the relentless pressures of financial collapse and social unrest. Louis XVI, a man of personal virtue but political indecision, inherited a kingdom teetering on the edge. Advisors urged reform, yet hesitation and indecision bred resentment. The Estates General convened, yet their voices of discontent could no longer be contained. Revolution ignited, and a king whose ancestors ruled for centuries found himself powerless against the tide of popular fury. The monarchy's fall was swift once the people and key military figures withdrew their support. The lesson endures. Legitimacy in the eyes of the governed is the ultimate currency of power. Tsar Nicholas II ruled a vast empire, yet the might of Russia could not shield him from systemic fragility. Economic hardship, military defeats, and political mismanagement eroded the foundations of his authority. By 1917, the Russian Revolution had gathered unstoppable momentum. Nicholas' decisions, guided by isolation and poor counsel, alienated the nobility, military, and populace alike. The machinery of autocracy, armies, secret police, and bureaucracy, failed to contain the swelling demand for change. The fall of the Romanovs reminds us that absolute authority depends on competence, adaptability, and legitimacy. When these elements fail, even centuries of inherited power crumble rapidly. In the chaos of the 20th century, ideology became both weapon and trap. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini rose by exploiting economic despair, nationalist fervor, and public discontent. Their charismatic authority masked systemic weaknesses that would ultimately doom them. Hitler's absolute control over Germany was shattered by military defeat, strategic miscalculations, and the relentless advance of external forces. Mussolini, once the embodiment of fascist Italy, was captured and executed as the public turned violently against him. These cases demonstrate that even leaders who dominate through ideology and fear are vulnerable to the practical realities of war, logistics, and the erosion of public loyalty. The 21st century introduced a new dynamic, the instantaneous collapse of authority in the age of digital communication. Leaders in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, who once seemed unassailable, were swept from power within weeks by movements organized online and mobilized in streets. Traditional methods of control, security forces, censorship, and propaganda, proved insufficient against the combined force of public outrage and global scrutiny. These rapid overthrows illustrate that in the modern era, authority is no longer just about armies or institutions, it is about legitimacy in the eyes of a connected populace. Across millennia, from ancient empires to modern states, the rise and fall of rulers follow recurring patterns. Centralization of power, isolation from counsel, misjudgment of allies, and the erosion of legitimacy are constants. The instruments of authority, armies, bureaucracies, propaganda, sustain dominion but cannot prevent collapse when trust falters. Whether it is Caesar betrayed on the Ides of March, Louis XVI swept away by revolution, or a 21st century dictator deposed overnight, the story is always the same. Ambition meets reality, hubris meets consequence, and authority meets its limits. Betrayal is history's most decisive force. It is silent, patient, and often invisible until the final moment. Advisors who whisper dissent, generals who withhold loyalty, confidants who conspire, these figures turn power inward, from a fortress into a trap. In all eras, betrayal has proven more potent than external assault. The fall of Richard III, the conspiracies against Caesar, and the palace coups of modern autocrats demonstrate that internal fissures are often the true architects of collapse. Authority is only as strong as the consent of those governed. Public perception, shaped by policy, propaganda, and lived experience, sustains or undermines rulers. Economic hardship, corruption, and social injustice erode loyalty faster than armies ever could. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the Arab Spring all demonstrate this truth. When people withdraw their implicit consent, power collapses, not gradually, but often violently and irreversibly. History is not predetermined. Chance, miscalculation, and unforeseen events shape outcomes as much as strategy and strength. A sudden illness, an unexpected military defeat, or a natural disaster can overturn even the most secure reigns. Alexander the Great died young, leaving his empire to fragment under generals' ambitions. Napoleon, a master strategist, was undone by weather, coalitions, and misjudged battles. In the modern era, scandals, economic crises, and technological disruptions accelerate the fall of leaders who once seemed invincible. The stories of those overthrown serve as more than historical curiosity. They are lessons in governance, psychology, and human nature. Absolute power carries a paradox. It offers authority, yet demands constant vigilance. It inspires loyalty, yet attracts envy. It enables greatness, yet risks catastrophe. Ambition, strategy, and intelligence can achieve remarkable heights, but hubris, misjudgment, and detachment from reality bring ruin. The rise and fall of statesmen is a mirror, reflecting the timeless interplay between human desire for control and the limits imposed by circumstance, society, and morality. From the pharaohs of Egypt to modern presidents, the cycle repeats. Power is seized, consolidated, challenged, and ultimately, often lost. Each generation inherits the lessons of the past, yet each new ruler tests the same forces: loyalty, legitimacy, betrayal, and fate. Control over the state is temporary, fragile, and complex. Its exercise demands wisdom, foresight, and humility. The fallen rulers of history leave behind echoes, warnings, and legacies, a testament to the fragility and grandeur of human ambition. History is a conversation between the past and the present. It speaks not in certainty, but in patterns. It reminds us that the corridors of power are not simply spaces of authority. They are stages of human ambition, frailty, and consequence. Those who controlled the state, until they were overthrown, are remembered not for invincibility, but for the delicate balance between mastery and misstep. Their stories endure, a cautionary tale etched across time. Power is not inherited, it is earned, sustained, and always at risk of slipping away. Power is rarely exercised alone. Every ruler relies on a network of advisors, ministers, and bureaucrats whose decisions can uphold authority or catalyze its collapse. Their influence is subtle, often invisible, yet decisive. In the court of Louis XIV, ministers like Colbert and Louvois shaped France's destiny behind the throne. In imperial China, eunuchs and mandarins manipulated imperial edicts, influencing dynasties for decades. Even in modern democracies, bureaucrats and cabinet ministers quietly shape policy, sometimes undermining the very leaders they serve. These hidden figures operate at the intersection of loyalty and ambition. A misjudged alliance, a concealed grievance, or a secret conspiracy can turn an ally into the instrument of a ruler's downfall. Power relies not only on armies and laws, but on information, or the lack of it. Intelligence, espionage, and secret policing have shaped the rise and fall of rulers across centuries. Consider Elizabeth I of England. Her survival depended on the vigilance of her spy masters, who uncovered plots before they reached the throne. Conversely, rulers who ignored warning signs, from Tsar Nicholas II to Saddam Hussein, fell victim to conspiracies they failed to detect. Information, carefully controlled, can stabilize a regime. Ignored, it becomes the harbinger of collapse. No ruler exists in isolation. Alliances, treaties, and foreign powers shape the possibilities of control. Diplomacy is not merely negotiation, it is survival. Napoleon's downfall, for example, was not only a result of military defeat but the collapse of alliances. Tsarist Russia, Britain, and Prussia coordinated to dismantle what seemed invincible. In modern times, the international community can amplify domestic opposition, turning internal dissent into unstoppable momentum. Diplomacy can stabilize a ruler or accelerate their demise. Success depends on perception, trust, and timing, and miscalculations are often fatal. History is written by rulers, but lived by ordinary citizens. For them, the rise and fall of leaders shapes daily life, trade, survival, security, and opportunity. From the peasants of revolutionary France to citizens in modern-day Tahrir Square, the collapse of authority is a tangible, often violent, reality. Their loyalty or resistance can determine the pace of change. Revolutions do not emerge in a vacuum. They are fueled by hardship, hope, and human resilience. History's greatest overthrows are as much a story of ordinary lives responding to extraordinary events as they are of rulers losing their grip. In the modern era, power is inseparable from communication. Control over media, access to information, and the speed of dissemination shape authority as much as armies or ideology. The Arab Spring, the fall of autocrats in Africa, and political crises in Europe illustrate a fundamental truth. Public opinion is instantaneous, global, and amplified. Leaders who fail to adapt to the pace of information, or attempt to suppress it, find themselves vulnerable in unprecedented ways. Information is the new battlefield, and the inability to control narrative can accelerate overthrow faster than any military campaign. All rulers, from the pharaohs to modern presidents, face the same ultimate reality: mortality and the limits of human authority. Power, for all its grandeur, is temporary. It can shape nations, ignite wars, and inspire generations, yet it can be undone by human error, ambition, circumstance, or rebellion. The study of overthrown rulers is not merely fascination with downfall, but a meditation on responsibility, ambition, and the fragility of human institutions. History repeats, not because it is inevitable, but because human nature rarely changes. In every story of rise and fall, there is a lesson. Power is earned, sustained through wisdom and legitimacy, and always at the mercy of forces larger than any individual. Those who controlled the state, until they were overthrown, remind us that authority is both a privilege and a peril. History is often told through the lens of the famous, Caesars, Napoleons, and monarchs, yet countless rulers fell quietly, their stories buried in archives and local memory. These minor figures reveal the same universal truths: ambition, loyalty, and the fragility of authority. In 16th century Africa, the Kingdom of Congo saw kings deposed not by foreign conquest, but by internal factions leveraging economic control and religious influence. In South America, the Inca Empire's regional governors switched allegiances to Spanish conquistadors, accelerating the collapse of a civilization from within. Even when history overlooks these events, the lessons remain. Power is contingent, and loyalty is a fragile commodity. Control is not just physical, it is mental. Rulers have historically relied on spies, secret informants, and propaganda to maintain dominance. Yet the very tools that sustain power can also precipitate collapse. In Nazi Germany, state-controlled media shaped perception while secret police suppressed dissent. In ancient China, eunuchs and court spies monitored rivals. But when these mechanisms fail, when misinformation spreads or the population no longer believes, authority disintegrates swiftly. Information is both shield and weapon. Those who mismanage it often fall faster than they could anticipate. No ruler is immune to the power of collective action. While betrayal from within destabilizes authority, revolt from below accelerates its collapse. The peasant revolts of medieval Europe, the storming of the Bastille, and the uprisings of modern Tunisia all illustrate the latent power of ordinary people. Discontent, long suppressed, erupts in moments that redefine history. Revolutions are not spontaneous. They are built on years of neglect, hardship, and the perception that leadership no longer serves the public. From Rome to Russia, from Versailles to Tahrir Square, the anatomy of overthrow repeats itself. Certain elements consistently appear: overreach, isolation, betrayal, public dissatisfaction, and unexpected events. Leaders who fail to adapt, who underestimate allies or overestimate loyalty, are particularly vulnerable. Conversely, those who maintain connection to institutions, the public, and the flow of information survive far longer, though no ruler escapes the eventual consequences of human ambition and circumstance. The fall of power is rarely purely political, it is deeply human. Pride, fear, isolation, and misjudgment shape the decisions that lead to collapse. Napoleon overextended himself in Russia, Tsar Nicholas II misread his generals, Julius Caesar trusted Brutus. These are stories of human frailty magnified by authority. Power amplifies tendencies toward arrogance, paranoia, and overconfidence, yet human judgment is imperfect. The fall of rulers reshapes not just politics, but culture, society, and identity. Art, literature, architecture, and religion all respond to the vacuum left by authority. In Renaissance Florence, the Medici's exile inspired new political thought and artistic expression. After the French Revolution, writers, painters, and philosophers reflected on liberty and power. In modern revolutions, citizens document upheaval through media, art, and digital archives. Collapse changes the collective psyche. What was once feared or revered becomes subject to reflection, critique, and reinterpretation. In the 21st century, lessons from history are immediate, amplified, and globally visible. Digital networks, instant communication, and real-time public scrutiny mean that overreach, corruption, and misjudgment can no longer remain hidden. Modern leaders must navigate the same forces as their historical counterparts: loyalty, legitimacy, betrayal, and circumstance, but with the added pressure of a global audience. The fall of authority can now be witnessed live, with consequences reaching far beyond national borders. The rise and fall of rulers is the story of humanity itself: ambition and frailty, loyalty and betrayal, order and chaos. Control over the state is never permanent. It is always contested, always provisional, and always shaped by forces beyond any one individual's grasp. The overthrown are remembered not for failure alone, but for the lessons their stories provide. Power is owned, maintained through wisdom, humility, and legitimacy, and always, inevitably, at risk of slipping away.